Welcome to the Single Sidebar podcast with your host, Dr. Sam I Am. We are elated that you decided to tune into this podcast. We're going to be focusing on 3 areas: health, wealth, and traveling well for singles living in the 21st century. So let me pull you to the side and help you get your life together so that you can maximize your season of singleness. Evening, gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Single Sidebar Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sam I Am. I am so elated to be with you all on this evening for our Being Black in America, a special edition of Single Sidebar Podcast. Usually, to my audience, first and foremost, thank you guys so much for being faithful listeners. You all are usually expect a 30-minute conversation. However, due to the climate of our country currently, I wanted to bring a special edition on this evening. This episode is actually going to be an hour long because I have 3 dynamic gentlemen joining me on this evening, and I'm going to turn the floor over to them now so that they each can introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Victor Solomon.
All right. Good evening, everyone, to everyone who is viewing. I am Victor Solomon. I am a rising senior at North Carolina A&T State University, studying business management. And I am so grateful for this opportunity and this platform to speak to you all about what we're going to be talking about tonight. So,
Stephen?
Hey everybody, my name is Stephen Fales. Since Vic tossed it in there, I'm an A&T grad, A grad. I'm currently employed at Guilford as what they call a Guilford Guide, which is an academic and career advisor and course instructor, and I'm happy to be with you all tonight. I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate everybody listening.
Dr. Morgan?
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Tobias Morgan. I am a HBCU alum, 2-time HBCU alum of Lincoln University of Pennsylvania, as well as Morgan State University. And I currently work at Tennessee State University. I'm the Director of Student Life and Activities. And that's about it. Happy to be here.
All right. And so I invited these gentlemen on this evening because of their current work that they're doing, whether it is that they're on campus advocating for the rights of students, which each of these gentlemen do in their own right at their current locations, their schools, their jobs, and different things like that, but also for their work in the community and how they are so proactive in making sure that each and every member of their community is well represented, one, as well as that the needs are met of the individuals in the community. So we're going to jump right into the conversation on this evening. I feel like I'm hearing an echo or some back, so I'm going to mute myself whenever they are talking, and gentlemen, feel free to do the same, just so that we don't have that much feedback. And so again, to our audience, thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate you all for coming in on this evening. And see, if I'm looking down, I'm just trying to make sure that I have the questions set so that they're able to address those things that we definitely want to talk about. So my first question to you gentlemen on this evening, and to our listening audience, if you do have questions, please also post them in the Facebook chat so that we can actually see those. And if it's something that we also want to make sure if we have time that we address those questions as well. All right. So the first question I want to pose to each of the gentlemen: what does being a black man mean to you, and how do you think that differs from society's narrative of who a black man is? Again, what does being a black man mean to you, and how do you think that differs from society's narrative of who a black man is?
So I guess I'll start it off. So for me, I think I believe a black man is someone who's strong, a king royalty, someone who pushes boundaries and defies stereotypes. Just someone who is definitely a motivator or innovator, and someone who's a role model to the next generation coming up. And I strongly believe that society's narrative of a black man, they perceive us as being different. They view us as a threat in society. The Black man is a threat to their person, to their survival. They attempt to water us down, and I say that from a space of our presence. We're seeing that we're seeing that display a lot today, even within the movements that are going on. Specifically speaking about like Black Lives Matter, you'll see the hashtags of Black Lives Matter, but then you'll also see All Lives Matter. And you know, this is not a human rights issue. This is a Black issue. So to water us down to say All Lives Matter during this specific time is an insult to African Americans, to Black people, because Blackness is a microcosm of All Lives Matter. So if all lives matter, we would not have to say Black Lives Matter.
I'll go next. What being a Black man means to me is, like he said, someone who holds themselves as a king because we were kings before we were slaves. Someone who is resilient, someone who provides, someone who is a man who is educated, a man who is strong, like my brother said. And I believe that the narrative that society portrays us is that we are uneducated, that we are thieves, we are prisoners, we are weak, we are a threat. And what I have a problem is that as Black men, we don't always when we fall into our issues, and when we come up with and we fall into the things that society puts us into, it allows everyone else to basically paint this picture of what a Black man should be, which is not. We are educated. I go to one of the top HBCUs for Black engineers. So with that being said, the narrative that society poses on us is not true. My belief is that we are strong, and that we should continue to be strong, and that we should continue to fight for our goals and our rights and everything else that we believe in. So, yeah.
So personally, I would argue that a Black man is all of the things that you heard Dr. Morgan and Victor say. I'm going to jump to the societal perception of Black men. And I think more than anything right now, Black men are enigmatic. Society doesn't know what to think about us. They see you coming and they can't gauge what type of Negro you are. And that is the thing that invokes an attitude and perspective or perception of threat when they see us. If you're a safe Negro, you're fine. And by you're fine, what I mean is, as long as you do what I think you should be doing, that makes you fine. If you're a loudmouth, rebel-rousing, troublemaking Negro, that's a whole different level. And then even then, there are sub-levels, because are you an MLK or are you a Malcolm X? Are you a Stokely Carmichael? Or are you a Fred Hampton? Are you a Clarence Thomas? I don't know what kind of Negro you are. And so it leaves us in a position in which we are constantly playing a figurative game of psycho-emotional chess, trying to navigate the next move and the next step based on other people's perceptions of us, all for the sake of trying to be respected and acknowledged as worthy, viable, protect our personhood, and above all, remain safe and alive.
Ooh, Lord, that was only question number one.
Right. And I think that I just want to jump in on that. I think he raised a good point when he says, you know, they don't know what type of Negro is coming. And I think that's part of the beauty of being a Black man in today's society, because there's so much, we're so diversified in our Blackness, and it's underestimated, because they may look at me and see the tattoos, not knowing that I'm a doctor, or they may see me and just judge me off the strength of what they're visually looking at and not know the content or what's deep inside. So I appreciated his comment when he said, you know, are you a Malcolm or are you a Martin? And, you know, that hits deep.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is true. That is so true. Like, people don't understand when we talk about it's not just the shades of our diversity, but it is the character of our diversity. It is in so many different perspectives. And so I think you guys hit such great points. And so that jumps into my next question when we're talking about our diversity. Thinking back to your childhood, what was your first experience with racism that you recognized? And how did that shape your safety and identity towards moving forward? So when was the first time you all, thinking back into your childhood, faced racism?
Well, for me, I vaguely remember it, but I would say that my first experience was I probably was about like 9 or 10 years old. And my family, we used to go on vacation during the summer to the Poconos in Pennsylvania. And so, there's very little of us out that way. So I can remember the situation. I know we were in a store and my dad was going to purchase something, and it just felt like everyone was watching us when we entered the store. And I know that the man said something to my father, and just seeing my father's his anger, that not so much anger, but I believe it was a distaste for the way the man was treating us, specifically because he had his Black children with him, and this was going on in the store. So that was my first experience. I didn't really have a full understanding of it, but I knew something was going on because we were the only ones that looked like us in that space. And it just was an uncomfortable feeling for us at the time. And so I feel as though that kind of shaped my identity or gave me a foundational understanding, honestly, of what race was, and kind of gave me my first introduction to white supremacy and whiteness. And so I think today, my research is really around race, gender, and sexuality. And so I zoned. I remember when I was in taking coursework, I zoned in on white supremacy and whiteness, and we had a discussion on it from the space of Blackness and what that looked like. And so that's something that I really value from my experience as a child and the way that my father raised me as a Black man. And I think that experience shaped who I am today and put a strong likeness to support younger generations coming after me, which is why I work at HBCU, why I support HBCUs, because I see the greatness in it and the way it shapes and molds our young leaders of today for the next Martins and Malcolms and those to step up and hit those ranks.
Yes, sir. For me, I would say that I've actually never experienced racism. I've never had to face it. And I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Illinois. I grew up in Illinois. And I've never experienced racism, but however, I have seen some of my peers experience it. Obviously, we see people experience it on social media, all over the news. And it, moving forward, it helped me to love the skin that I'm in, be proud of who I am and where I come from and my background, and which is also one of the reasons why I attend an HBCU, North Carolina A&T State University. And also, like I said, just being proud of who I am, being proud of my background, being proud of the color of my skin, and everything else that comes with being a Black man. I believe that also when we look at what we go through, I believe that it's important to not just give up. And because we see right now in the world that we're in, it's not easy being Black. It's not easy being Black in America. It's not easy being Black in this world, actually. And I look at it as, I don't look at it as an excuse. I think that we should challenge our excuses. And since we are the minority, and since we are looked at as being a threat or whatever you may have it, or however you may say it, we should take that and run with it. As a Black man, I believe that we should go for our goals even more. We should build businesses, be entrepreneurs, be doctors, be lawyers, and be everything that they said we couldn't be. It allows us and it gives us a platform to become even greater. Like he said, those Malcolms and those Martins, and if we're never put in a situation under pressure, we will never grow. we will never become better. So keep doing what you're doing. Well, don't keep what you're doing, but I'm not making an excuse for what's going on in America. I'm not going to back down, because I know that after this, we're only going to be stronger. We're only going to be bigger. We're only going to be better. So there's no excuse. I'm not sorry for being who I am. I'm not sorry for the color of my skin. I don't apologize for the actions of my community. I'm with my community in everything that we do and we say. So.
So similarly to Vic, I have been incredibly blessed, very fortunate, that I have not had any very personal experiences with overt racism. I am a subject to the subtleties, the covert racism, the microaggressions, micro insults, and all other things systematic as anybody else, black and brown. But similarly to Dr. Morgan, the first time that I can recall that it ever came close to me, so it didn't directly, it was not my direct experience, but it was my experience that I felt the immediate impact. I watched my father receive a death threat via phone call. Growing up, I saw that 3 different times. The 2 latter times I knew what it was because I remembered the facial expression, the body language, and the energy that I experienced the first time that I saw it. My dad was a pastor and minister and a community activist in all ways possible, to the core. He was the blackest man I ever knew, to the core. And, you know, the reality is when you are legitimately freedom fighting, there are some terrifying consequences, whether they are rightful or not, obviously not. But there's some terrifying consequences that you subject yourself to. And so I recall it was the first time that I realized how close racism is, how close it always is. I can remember for the rest of that week, the next few days, whatever it may have been, the anxiety that I felt about whether or not somebody would attempt to run across in my front yard or vandalize the church, you know, or something like that. And, you know, when you watch a person who is larger than life, you know, in particular, a young boy, watching his father, who is his provider, his protector, his hero, his teacher, everything, have to withstand something like that was beyond his control. It does something to you mentally. It does something to you emotionally. Now, to be clear and to be fair to my father, he did not cower, but it did not, you know, nonetheless, there was a particular response to that experience and observing it happen. And so that's the first that I can remember encountering it very closely of my own accord.
And so to piggyback off of that, so consider, or can you recount any recent experiences with racism? What was your reaction and what emotions came about as a result of that encounter?
So for me, I haven't personally experienced racism, you know, as a person. However, when I lived in Kentucky, I used to work at Kentucky State University, which is in Frankfort, Kentucky, the capital of Kentucky. Very conservative, very white area. And so while I was there, I guess I was going through a culture shock. And so I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, went to grade school and high school in Brooklyn, and then relocated to Pennsylvania, to Chester, Pennsylvania, where it's kind of like right outside of Philadelphia. Still at an HBCU, so still in a Black environment. So and then moving as an adult to Maryland, living in Maryland, prior to going to Kentucky, it was really a culture shock for me. And being the only safe haven I felt was at work, at my HBCU within that small campus community. Once you step foot outside of that campus, I felt like I was back the only Black person in the city. And so consistently seeing Confederate flags on people's houses, at the door for a greeting, seeing Trump supporters having Trump stickers on their cars, and signs on the highways, actual advertisement signs about Trump. It really just kind of put a dent in my joy, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to leave Kentucky, because it just was a negative feeling just driving through the city. If I just wanted to run out the house to go grab something quickly, it just wasn't a good feeling. And then one day in particular, my son actually saw a Confederate flag hanging when we were driving on the highway, and he said to me, "That's not the United States flag." And so that was just like a aha moment for me. He didn't know what the Confederate flag was at that time. All he saw was a flag, and it was red, white, and blue, and he saw some stars on it. So he connected it to what he assumed to be not the United States of America flag. So that was my first experience, I guess, as an adult for me with racism and feeling those deep feelings, harboring those feelings.
Yeah, like I said, I've never really experienced it as well, like as an individual. But I think the most recent time was I was at work, and I actually heard a white girl call one of my Black coworkers a nigger, and I couldn't understand it. And at the time, of course, we were all angry. We were shocked because it came out of her mouth. And I mean, she was obviously angry with him, and they were arguing back and forth. And she called, and that came out of her mouth. And I said, "No," I'm like, "What?" And she ended up being fired from the job, which we're grateful for. But it just, like, there are still people today, literally today, who are still racist, who still have it in their hearts. And at this point, the only thing I can do is I can pray. I can pray, because at the end of the day, we're all going to have to answer to God at the end of the day, no matter who we are, whether we're white, Black, Native American, Mexican, Chinese, no matter who we are, what ethnicity we come from, or what ethnicity we are going to have to answer to God. And that's one thing that I always think about when racism comes up. Like, I can do something, and I can be that leader. I can be the person that advocates for those who can't for themselves. But at the end of the day, I can only think of praying and just asking God to help us all. And that's really it right now.
So I guess it's not the worst thing that the most recent thing that I can recall was, again, not necessarily directed towards me, and it's actually not particularly recent. It's probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Prior to working at Guilford College, of course, I was a teacher. I was a high school teacher. I taught at James B. Dudley High School, which is a historical gem. And at this point in time, more or less an anomaly. There are not many historically Black high schools still standing. And one of the things that impacted me probably much more than I let on was having to have conversations with students who were athletes when we were going to have to travel to play in games and athletic competitions that were in geographic locales that were not Black friendly. Having to have conversations with kids to get them to understand that while it's almost unfair to ask you to tame your emotions based on this discrimination and bigotry that you're about to face, you're going to have to do it, especially for the sake of your athletic progress, if you expect to advance through this competition. And just knowing, that we would go into places, and even though these are kids, you're going to have adult referees, you're going to have adult parents on the other sides of the stadiums who may or may not say things overtly, but you could feel it as soon as you come into the stadium. And I'm not particularly shy, and I don't work for Guilford County Schools anymore, so I call it like I see it. when my kids were on their state championship run the second year I was teaching, and we had a playoff game at Davie County High School over in Moxville. I used to work with the band. You know, I'm a band guy. And I can remember going into the stadium. We went to the stadium, and our kids had to sit on the hill because the 10 or 15 people who didn't look like us, who were occupying the space that was actually sectioned off for the band, refused to get up and move. Now, Davie County is not like East Greensboro. It is not a place that is particularly melanated. And we have a team that's about to come in here and roll right over you. So, you know, it's always peculiar as an adult person when children are about to bear the brunt of someone's hatred, even beyond their developmental capacities and abilities to understand what's actually happening in its fullness. You know, these kids are still in school. They're learning the history. You know, they're learning the story. They're learning the narrative. And then moving forward and just trying to educate them and teach them what it is that they're going to, unfortunately, wind up walking into in their adulthood, and what it is they have to be prepared for, this scourge, racism that we can't seem to get rid of. So, yeah.
And that is so unfortunate, but it's happening. How do you explain to children that they have to minimize who they are, or they have to, you know, change the narrative of their, you know, their whole culture just to fit in and make somebody else feel comfortable? So you have to become uncomfortable so somebody else can be comfortable. And it shouldn't be. And so my next question, and my iPad will lock out. My next question is, according to the NAACP in 2014, African Americans constituted 2.3 million, or 34% of the total 6.8 million correctional population. Let me say those numbers again, y'all. 2.3 million African Americans, which is about 34%, occupy our corrections facilities, and that's prison, that's jail, out of the 6.8 million. African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of whites. How do these numbers affect you and your friends group, and what can we do in order to reduce these numbers?
So this question kind of reminds me of, before I kind of jump in on the answer, reminds me of an activist by the name, she's an anti-racism activist by the name of Jane Elliott. She was speaking to a group of white professors, and she posed a question to them and said, if you want to be treated the same as our Black citizens, please stand up. You know, no one responded to her when she initially posed the question, so she restated her question. If you want to be treated as a Black citizen in society, please stand up. And so no one in the room stood up, which really, to me, was a eye-opener. Not that they didn't stand up, but it was just an eye-opener of what that meant and what that stood for in that space. And so that stood for that white people are aware of what's happening in society, what's going on, and they don't want it for themselves, but they're okay with Black people being treated this way. So why are you so willing to allow it to happen to other people, but not for yourself? And so when you ask that question, I think the first thing that pops in my mind is off the top of my head would just be for our younger generation to get out and vote. Everyone get out and vote, because that's really how we're going to start making a few changes on every level, not just with the president, but within your respective states and counties that you live in your cities. And I think that will begin to kind of shift somewhat of the narrative. Every time someone does not vote, that leaves an opportunity for Trump. And so I think that's a message that we need to share with everyone, that the importance of voting, and how our ancestors and how our grandparents and generations past have fought for so much of this. And so it's kind of like a cycle, and it's happening again. And so we're trying to carry out the voices that were left unheard.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And like you said, those numbers are outrageous. And like you said, to get one of the things to reduce those numbers is definitely voting. We preach vote all the time here at A&T. And another thing that I think about when it comes to reducing those numbers, is that we as Black people and as Black men today, at least my peers, we have the platform and we have the opportunity to set a new standard, basically, for those who are coming up after us, our younger generations. I believe that if they see better, then they will do better. Coming from the background that I come from, originally in Chicago, Illinois, then moving on to Peoria, Illinois, both cities who have a high rate of crime and also violence and street violence. We realize that in those neighborhoods, young boys and young girls, they only see those leaders being gangbangers and fighters and shooters and people who end up going to jail. So that's all they know. So that's what they want to be like. So I feel that if they see more of Black people that come from the same community, because in order for us Black people to even trust you, we have to feel some type of relatability, basically. Like you have to relate to me somewhere. I'm not going to listen to you if you don't even know what I'm going through. You have to know what I'm going through. You have to put yourself in my shoes. So when I believe that when we start setting that standard for the young boys and young girls in our neighborhoods, showing them that we can, like I said earlier, that we can be engineers, that we can be doctors, that we can be lawyers, and not even just that, we can be artists, we can be dancers, we can do anything that we want to do. You know what I'm saying? We can be preachers and pastors, and we can be entrepreneurs. Then they will see how great of an impact that, how beneficial that was for us. And I believe that will be a great step into them wanting to become better. Sorry about that. Them wanting to become better. So yeah, I just feel that we should show them the way. Basically set a new standard for our young boys and our young girls.
So again, fortunately, this question, as important as it is not specifically pertinent to me or my experience, my upbringing, or even my friends. And I consider myself more than blessed in so many ways for so many reasons. But when I consider the numbers, 34% composition in the prison industrial complex, Black people are roughly 13 or 14% of the total U.S. population. So 300 million people, give or take. We're about 40 to 45 million people. You're talking about some extremely disproportionate numbers. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. But as a history guy, as a history teacher, I will always champion that you have to teach people the story. You have to teach them the narrative. One of the things that I was able to experience, one of the things I'm always able to experience as an educator, is that if you can get kids to really grasp the why and the how when it comes to the way things have evolved, you can light a righteous fire in them that acts as a point of motivation for change. The reality is a lot of young people in particular who fall into practices, behaviors, and patterns that are consistent with criminality are typically just trying to survive. And the irony in that is that they're trying to survive circumstances, the roots of which are actually found in racial discrimination, codified racial discrimination. Whether it's a 13th Amendment with a loophole, whether it's redlining in communities, whether it's the denial of financial leveraging through personal loans, business loans, whatever the case may be, they have to learn the narrative and the story. That is vitally important to get them to understand how this thing came to be. The word ghetto does not belong to Black people. Ghetto was applied to Jewish communities in Europe for centuries before it became culturally appropriated in adverse form by Black people. So it's a mischaracterization of who you are. But it is a proper application that describes a number of, developed concepts, all of which are associated to that survival, are associated with that survival. And so you really have to break that down and get them to understand what racism as a means to promote and uphold classism has actually looked like. There's a reason why you're deprived. There's a reason why you inherited poverty. And then if you can get them to understand that, your next battle is getting people to shift their perspective. You have to counter the culture and the modes of thinking that come with states of impoverishment. Because again, that'll take you right back to survival. And survival says, I will do anything that I have to do in any way that I know how to do, that I can do to get where I want to be. And obviously that does not play out well. And then on the other side of this entire conversation, we have to talk about a reordering. Really, we need an overhaul within our quote unquote justice system, a system that has criminalized Black and brown people since before the formal establishment of the institution of slavery. The paddy rollers and the slave patrols that became policing, the devaluing of Black lives, where somebody could pay to send an enslaved person to fight in a war in their stead, or angry mobs of white people turning and attacking Black people who they thought were in some way, shape, or form positioned to assume the privilege in the economic, in the workforce. And as a result, we're going to riot, we're going to lynch. Like there are a lot of pieces and components to this. And without addressing those and understanding the root, then there's no way to counter the spaces that we're in now. So without that overhaul and without that redressing in the legal system, those elements and components that will dismantle assumptive criminality projected onto Black and brown people, those elements that will falsely accuse and imprison people who didn't do anything, or that will over-punish, for lack of a better way to put it, people who have committed crimes that are nonviolent, or whatever the case may be. You're talking about legitimate criminal justice reform. There's a long road there, but that's the best way to answer that question, and those are the best ways that we're going to actually be able to combat those ills.
Yeah, and before you go on to the next question, I also wanted to answer the first question that you asked and how it affects my friend group. It affects my friend group because we're all Black right now, and every time we go out the house, we have to, or every time we leave the house, we have to, be careful of what we do. And I'm reminded of one time I was riding with one of my LBs, and he was. I saw a cop in my rearview mirror, and he said, why you get so tense? Like, why you just, why you just change like your whole vibe? And I'm just like, man, I get anxious when I see them. I get anxiety when I see them. And it's not because I'm scared, because I'm not, but it's because we have to, when we don't know what's going to happen if a cop abuses his authority. We don't know, because we've seen instances where young Black men were they were obeying the rules, and they were obeying the officer, and they were still killed. They didn't show any aggressiveness towards the officer, and they were still shot because the officer felt threatened. And it's like, what can we do? You want me to be still with my hands here? You want me to let me just put my hands up, because at this point, I don't know what you want me to do. And when you tell me to do something, and you tell me to reach for my wallet, and I actually reach for my wallet, and then you shoot me. Now what? It's like, I disobey you, you shoot me. I obey you, you shoot me. So now what do we do? And that's really the issue, because And then these cops, they continue to do it because there's no justice being served. They aren't punished for what they do. And if they are punished, it's watered down. It's not like they are a normal citizen of America, and it's like they're above the law almost. And at this point, it's kind of like, what do we do? And that is the worst thing. That's one thing. If you really want to see a man's character, give him power. Give him power and see what he's going to do. If you want to test his integrity, give him power, give him authority. So.
And I think that leads into what you were saying, Victor. Also, what was going on today with the riots and different things, and I just think that, you know, as a community, Black people, you know, we're tired, and I think that's where the frustration is starting to come out with all these riots and the fires that are popping up across the country. I think they don't know how to perceive us when they see us. The police officers don't know how to perceive us, but then we also don't know if we're encountering a good cop or a bad cop. And so that's another set of anxiety that we feel as a people as well when we encounter law enforcement officials. And I don't know if some of you saw the video that just posted recently. I can't remember what city it was, but there was a white officer hitting a Black female and yelling at a Black male. And the Black female officer came from behind to those two Black individuals to their rescue and yelled at the white officer and removed him from the situation completely. And so, you know, we need more of that representation, a lot of that visualization to be on social media, because what we're seeing is not the picture of what they're trying to advertise or the message they're trying to send about all officers at that. And so, you know, there are some Black officers, and sometimes we get confused because because they're officers and then they're Black. So then that places them in the intersection, and they're battling their race and being Black, but they also have a job to do with getting, you know, taking care of their family and their survivalhood. So that's a totally different discussion, and you know how they feel as far as being Black and an officer. But then at least we are seeing that type of representation and support from Black officers now surfacing in the media. Even though it was only one occurrence that we saw, it was still something that was put out into the atmosphere for some type of discussion.
Ooh, y'all hitting heavy. I should see these comments. I mean, you guys are hitting some heavy thoughts, and everyone keeps saying what you said, Vic. If you want to see a man's character, give him power. And that was a very powerful statement. So y'all make sure y'all give credit where credit is due. And so we're going to transition into our, oh man, look at the time already, to our next question. So Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Eric Garner, Oscar Grant, Sandra Bland. Each of these individuals were unjustly murdered at the hand of police officers. Knowing this and carrying this with you on a daily basis, what concerns you the most as you go about your day?
So for me, you know, like Victor said earlier, you know, I'm not scared when I go out of my house, out of my door, and walk out into society, into the community. However, I'm cautious. I'm very cautious. I'm aware of my surroundings and what's going on within the communities, the stores, or wherever I may enter. But I believe the number one thing is will I make it back home safely? Will I see this place again once I get in my car and pull off, or run down, take a jog, or I'm running or something of that nature? And as you were reading the names, I started getting flashbacks to every time, you know, when I'm watching the news and a breaking news story comes on with another hashtag, and I remember how I feel every time I hear one of those news reports, and it's kind of like, that could have been one of my friends. That could have been me. That could be my son. That could be one of my students. And it's just very, very heartbreaking, I guess I would say, to continuously see a hashtag of a Black person losing their life at the hands of a police officer, police brutality, for just being Black. And yesterday, one of my students, he's an aspiring news reporter, and he was in Louisville, Kentucky, and he was right in the midst of everything that was going on with the riots and the protests in Louisville. And I immediately just sat down, and I just felt like I was hopeless, I guess I would say, because I didn't really think that my students were in the midst of it. And so seeing him there with the police sirens going and people running in his background, and it just made me very nervous, and I just wanted to protect him, if that makes sense. And I couldn't. And so I reached out to him, and he's doing okay. He was reporting what was going on. And then this morning he went back out there. A young man was killed by a police officer just last night. And the body was laying there even up until 2 p.m. this afternoon, and the young man was killed last night. So, and he's recording this and posting it. And so I can only imagine the trauma that our young Black males and females are going through as they're participating in this, as they're viewing this, watching this on social media. And so, I guess my prayers are with all of us as we kind of continue this fight for freedom. I guess you would say it's the new age of what freedom will look like in America.
Yeah, like I said earlier, as far as leaving the house and being aware of our surroundings and the anxiety that we get when we see the cop car in our rearview mirror. On top of that, I believe that in today's time that we also should become very aware of our rights. And I think a lot of us lack the knowledge of our rights. And sometimes you don't hear you have the right to remain silent until after you're arrested. And what that does is they ask you all of these questions before you're arrested, but you don't know, because you don't really know your rights. You don't even know that you're not even supposed to really be answering questions right now. And I think that's one thing that we should do is we need to become aware of our rights. We need to be aware, because when we have these encounters with the police officers, we need to know what to say and what not to say. And we need to know how to move and how not to move. And yeah.
To ask me what I what I think about most, oh man, it makes you think about all the things that you consider. But the one thing that I think I consider first and foremost is there's not a day that I wake up and I don't make my peace with a contract with death or imprisonment. I'm not afforded the right to protect myself or people that I love. I usually have a weapon. That's the truth. I got one somewhere. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I'm not naive enough to believe that Constitution supports me the way that I believe in it. And this is why I have started many, many intensive debates. And this is not to counter Vic. Vic is right. But I've started many intensive debates about rights, because words on paper have never protected a Black body. Not here. They've never meant anything but the illusion of progress. And when you study this from a generational perspective, that's one of the ways that Black people were hoodwinked as a collective. When our leaders, and this is no disrespect to them in their efforts, but when our leaders were making progress, Black folk put that struggle down. They mistook measures of appeasement and progress for resolve. Appeasement and progress are not synonymous with resolve. That's not how that works. Moving forward a little bit doesn't mean that somebody won't come and push you back a lot of it. And so, at the end of the day, what good does it do you if you're running as hard as you can and somebody's literally breaking the ground underneath your feet? You become a hamster in a treadmill. And that is a very interesting thing to have to grapple with every day. I can know the law inside out, but that law does not protect me here. If it did, why are there multiple civil rights acts? Why do you need more than one? One should have done it. All of these addendums and additions that have to continually take place every time there's an injustice. Why? Because justice is not afforded to Black and brown people in absolution. It's an abstract concept. It's worth pursuit. It's a worthwhile pursuit. But there are some harsh realities that we just have to face on a daily basis. And so that is the one that plagues me most deeply. Am I prepared to go to prison today for doing the same thing that a white man could do to me without having to justify it in any way, shape, or form? I got a mom. I got a sister. If somebody was to accost my sister and I pulled out my 9 and I shot him and I was justified in doing it, I would have to depend. More than likely, I'd be depending on a core of Black women. Shout out to Black women to save me. I put almost a blind faith in a Black woman to pull out a phone or show up and harass a cop in a way that I could never do for her. And I carry that guilt every day. I could not do that for her without assuming the risk of being killed. It's a strange and cruel irony that a woman's invisibility and a Black woman's double invisibility is the same cloak that might save my life, whereas I'm always invisible and visible at the same time. It's a very, very strange thing, but that is what we grapple with on a daily basis. If I'm to understand the definition of a man, or at least key elements in the definition to be a provider and a protector, one of those I cannot rightfully do. That's tough. That is a very tough reality. And it just exacerbates a duality that Black men in particular are always dealing with. You're walking that tightrope of how to be the safe Negro, but also how to be a safe Negro. You know what I mean? It's wild. So.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. And it's funny that you mentioned that. I was actually talking to a friend of mine on this morning, and I said, our biggest thing is not getting the justice. The biggest thing is changing the law that governs that justice and getting individuals into those seats, those positions that can make those actual changes. And so I couldn't agree with you anymore. And so we had a question from the audience. I'm going to pause on my questions because I think this question that the individual asked was so prevalent. Oh man, where did it go? Okay, here we go. So the question was posed. Oh boy. Hold on, let me try to find the question again because it disappeared for some reason. I'm sorry, y'all. So I know someone posted, 2 people, Ashley Wiley and Tiara Carpenter. You both posted a question, but for some reason it actually disappeared. And so I'm not sure why, but I know Ashley's question had to deal with something that Dr. Cornel West had stated. And so hopefully, Ashley, if you don't mind, post that question again for me, please. And so that we can go ahead and have the gentleman respond to those questions. And so with that being said, I'm going to post one in the meantime while and this one is like off from the list of questions that I had sent to you guys. But looking at the state of education now, and I know Mr. Fales, this is directly, you can really address answer to this, but being that the other 2 gentlemen work in the collegiate level or are currently attending college, what are some of the things that as instructors we can be doing to assist our students in understanding the current state of our country and what they have the right to do even now to help change the narrative of the Black community?
So even though I work in a collegiate space now, what I will say about being a K-12 educator is that there's no one way to answer that question, and there's no direct answer to that question, because one of the greatest frustrations in K-12 is that you have to first and foremost deal with an educational system that was not structured to educate the nuanced experiences of Black and brown kids. That's just what it is. And even with people doing all that they can, where they can, to make some strides and progress, if we're being entirely honest, it's still just not enough. If I'm going to take a foundational document like the U.S. Constitution, and I'm going to teach it to a room of kids who are Black and brown, I got to teach that thing completely differently than I would teach it to their white counterparts, because the implications of the Constitution are vastly different, and were just that when it was written for people who look like them. So that's an example of a nuance that's not accounted for in the way that curricula are authored. Not to mention there's an outright assault on the existence and the narrative and the experience of Black and brown people, particularly in social studies and history curricula anyway. We got publishers and states who are completely leaving stuff out. Erasure is rampant. They're changing the narrative. Plantations were gardens and slaves were happy, and all this foolishness that is just a blatant lie. And so it becomes really difficult, because what ends up happening is educators have no choice but to put in even more extra effort on top of all of the extra effort I already know that they're putting in, to find ways to loophole culturally relevant aspects and perspectives while they're conveying the information that, some lawmakers who have never taught anything have told them that they have to instruct. And then, one of the things that I would do, and I should say as a disclaimer, again, I worked at James B. Dudley High School, completely different history, culture, and legacy. So I had some leverage there that you weren't going to find in other places in the county. But I would go off the record at a heartbeat. And I would teach kids what I felt like they needed to know, as opposed to what it was that something said I was supposed to teach. Now, whether or not a teacher wants to take that risk, I don't know. That it kind of comes down to where your gumption is. I'm not necessarily sure. But I went for it. I went off the cliff head first. A lot of the time, I spent too much time teaching this, not enough time teaching that. And every educator knows there's just not enough time anyway to cover all of the things. Trying to comprise, 250 years of history into a semester is, it's a perpetual impossibility. So at the end of the day, I would just take my chances. And if we were going to take 2 weeks and watch the Book of Negroes, then that's just what we were going to do. Are we done with that unit? Yes. But we're not done with the residual impacts and effects of the discrimination that the people who are representing this narrative had to deal with. So we're going to watch it. That's what it came down to. Now, again, I know that's not a straight answer. That's not the most direct answer. But at the end of the day, it's going to take, to be more direct, it's going to take a lot of creativity. Educators are going to have to hunt down some resources. Educators are going to have to build connections and relationships so that their students will trust them. Because a lot of the times, if that's not the case, your kids ain't picking up what you're putting down. They go back, they report you have these issues, all these problems, and it becomes a whole thing. So there's a lot of elements and components there. And I'm more than happy to talk to anybody who wants to further discuss that. Aside from this conversation, I'll give Dr. Morgan or Vic the opportunity to chime in here as well.
I would say on the collegiate level, I call them my kids because they're all of them my kids, but they come into the university from their freshman year. They come into the university activists. They're ready to take a stand. This generation that are currently in college, they are go-getters. They are radicals. They are not scared. They are unapologetically Black, and they are not ashamed of it. So I think going off what you just said, I think we have to be very innovative with our ideas and the way that we even introduce different events, ideas, or concepts to them now to kind of catch their attention, to keep that mindset that they entered with, to keep that going, so that even when they leave the gates of the university, they leave with that imprint within them, and they take that to wherever it is that they go moving forward in life. And so for me, I think having conversations like this, whether they're virtual or face-to-face, when you're on a collegiate campus, having these roundtable discussions, these talks, forums, however you want to frame it, is very valuable to a college student. And there can be times, a lot of times as a community, we mask our feelings, we mask how we feel about something, we mask our identities. And you may walk past someone on a college campus and they may be smiling, but underneath that smile, they're breaking it and they're breaking down tremendously. And so when you have these discussions, something that someone may say may spark something in you that just ignites a fire. And so having these spaces and vulnerable opportunities to just release and say what's on your mind, I think that's something that we can do on a collegiate level to keep the discussion going, and see some sort of change occur, because I think it begins with a discussion, which leads to a physical change further down the road. But I think that the first thing at it would be to sit down and let's talk about it. Let's let it out.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Dr. Morgan. I'm reminded of a time where we went to Myrtle Beach last year, and there was a program, and there were a lot of conferences and sessions going on inside of the conference, and it was just really about it was more so focused on orientation leaders in the summer, basically for incoming students, and there weren't too many HBCUs at this conference in Myrtle Beach, but there was a session that we had during the day, and I don't remember the name of the session, but it was just a session where it was just like pro-Black, and it was all of the Black people in that room. Like you said, we were having a conversation. We sat and we had a conversation, but it was in one of the most influential and just emotional things I could ever experience in my life. That during that time, I've never just felt more proud to be Black. And I think if we go into our schools and we do something similar to that, I think that it will just give us more sense of pride in who we are and everything that we have going for ourselves. But like you said, we have to do it in an innovative way to where our students and our learners can actually learn it and soak it in and actually leave with it and teach others and impact others. So, yeah.
Oh, there we go. That's good, y'all. That's really, really good. And so we are way past our 1 hour, and I know we could keep talking, but I've got to make sure that I get the audience questions addressed. So Ashley Wiley stated, Dr. Cornel West said that the crisis of leadership can be remediated by strategic and tactical thinking about new models of leadership and even integrated iconic figures of the past. Do you all think that we really need a Martin or a Malcolm? Social media and grassroots movements have changed the game. What is your perspective? With your perspective, will that same model be relevant to this day? So I'm assuming the same model of Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. And she stated, do you all think that we really need a Martin or a Malcolm? And with your perspective, will that same model be relevant to today?
I think that we're in a position in which we always need, I'll put it this way, we always need master teachers. And I'm gonna go a little biblical. When Christ showed up on the scene, he was rabbi, he was the master teacher. You always need an optimal example, a prime example to follow. Does it have to be a single individual or just a handful of single individuals? Excuse me, not necessarily. What I will say with regard to the model, I think that anytime you make historical reference, there are always foundational components that are perpetually useful. They transcend space and time. If we look at Martin, for example, one of the things, and I've thought about this for the last 24 hours or so, one of the things that could have helped save some of these protests is if they had been organized protests. One of the problems that the protests have had are people infiltrating. We got these narcs, and they're coming in and they're causing problems. Well, when your protest is organized, you know who belongs and who doesn't. Or you can establish the necessary guidelines to ensure ways of identification within the group. That way, we can find out whether or not homeboy over here actually belongs, or if he's just somebody who walked in off the side of the street. You know, that's a solid model. Those are foundational tenets and components. And one of the things that as fired up as younger generations are, Generation Z, younger millennials, middle millennials, as fired up as we are, one of the places where we miss it is that we visit history and the blueprint. And that's why we struggle a lot of the time. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be adaptations from modern context. That is a must. That progress has to be a thing, because suffice it to say, while things look similar to the way they did 60 years ago, we also know that there are a number of elements that did not exist 60 years ago that now exist. So you have to create the space for those modernistic adjustments and adaptations. But there's nothing wrong with revisiting that model, that blueprint. Even with Malcolm, you know, if nothing else, revisit his personal journey and his dedication to a continual, he was continually dedicated to transformational learning, which is why he was no less radical when he was extinguished than he was when he started, but his perspectives were very different. And that is something that we can grab a hold of. And it wouldn't hurt us to accept the concept of being, you know, transformational learners. So whomever it is, you know, that we're going to look back, whoever's model, if it's going to be Booker T and WEB, whoever you're looking at, you know, somebody's got a model that has some foundational tenets that can always be useful. We have the fire and the brilliance and the ingenuity to make the adjustments that we need to address issues in modern context.
You know, I was going to bring up that point as well. And even, you know, thinking about the Martins and the Malcolms, but then going further back and thinking about Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois and their concept of educating the Black male. And with W.E. Du Bois, he felt as though we should go out and protest and be radical, you know, and things of that nature. So I don't necessarily think we need another Martin or Malcolm or W.E. Du Bois, but we can use the blueprint, what they left for us, and redesign something that fits today. What's going on? Although we're still fighting for some of the same rights, equalities, inclusion, and different things of that nature, we can still use and reference those models that our historical leaders used in the past. But we just sometimes, you know, you have to tweak things to make it fit present day. And so I think that's what we really need to do, and zone in on that. It's not a thing of do we need one or two. It's just what is the model going to be?
Yes, I totally agree with that. Both of you said it all. Basically, just following the blueprint, and also, like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be one or two civil rights leaders in this time, but it can be us as a community. And we all have those characteristics, someone who is brave, someone like you said, but it needs to be organized so that we need to have a leader or someone who can lead us and show us how things are supposed to be ran so that we don't cause confusion and then like just basically everything you already said, and allowing people to come in and mess everything up. And, you know, those people who are setting buildings on fire and basically manipulating the protest to make it seem like Black people did it. So that's, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you guys. And I think that actually addresses the question that Tiara Carpenter had, and she was talking about where do you guys feel like you fall in as far as activism is concerned in the modern age? Do you model your activism to the model of a previous activist such as W. Du Bois, such as, you know, Frederick Douglass, or are you a new age, more modern, and so forth and so on. So that would be the closing questions. Who, if you were to compare your activism, or even not comparing it, if you don't want to compare it, or just relate it to someone of our previous activists, who would it be?
I'd say right now for me, I am one of those activists who I know who I am and what I can do. So I would have to be here doing my part. I would have to be here. I would have to be signing the petitions online and sharing things and sharing my opinion. But as far as going out into the streets and doing things, because I know I've even seen peaceful protesters be excessively abused. And I know, like I said, I know who I am, and I know what I would do if I'm in that position. So it would only make things worse if I'm out there. It would only make things worse. I can't be the one to add to the problem, because I'm telling you, if someone hits me in my head or someone shoves me to the ground, it's gonna be a problem, and I mean that. But like I said, I have to do it here because not only am I representing myself, but I'm representing so many others. I'm representing my family. I'm representing my mother. I'm representing God. I'm representing the church. I'm representing my university. So right now, I have to do my part here. So that's who I
am. For me, I guess I would say, and this is just, I guess, from being in the field of higher education, I think for me, I'm somewhere in the middle of Booker and WEB. And so I say that because, I do believe in the power of education and just knowing some foundational premises that can take you further in life. But then I also, on the flip side, I believe in protesting and standing up for what you do believe in, as you see what's going on today. And so I guess that's kind of where I stand at, in the middle of those two individuals. And I do that because I want to show my students that that it's okay to be out there in support of something that you believe in, to be unapologetically Black, and to not be scared to stand up for justice. And so I think I land somewhere in the middle of the two of those individuals, historic figures, especially within the field of higher education. They're two prominent men that we study in school. So I believe that that's where I lie.
It's a dangerous question to ask me. It really is, because you might get answers you don't want. To be entirely honest, it depends on the day and the circumstance. Some days I want to exercise Martin's vision. Other days I want to exercise, Malcolm's militancy. Some days I want, Du Bois' like political genius. Other days, I want to exercise the innovative approaches that Booker T used. Unbeknownst to many, there was some innovation that was happening there. And then there are days that I wake up and I feel a little bit more like, Karl Marx or Frederick Engels, because I see people being economically oppressed. And then there are other days I get up and I just want to be cool today. So I'm trying to walk like Barack. It really depends on what it is that's happening in the space. And if you make me mad enough, I might want to shoot like Robert Williams. If you don't know who Robert Williams is, you might want to check that out. It depends. I think at the end of the day, the beauty of it is that we have enough diversity in historical leaders and figures that we can kind of pull from them all. And I think that's the mark that people miss, especially, when it comes to how we govern, how we structure our systems. There are some things we want to stay all the way away from, like we don't want any fascism by any means. But at the end of the day, it can be really difficult to determine who it is you're trying to be when the space that you operate in don't even know what it is. America is a democratic republic, but we have two political parties. One is Democrat and one is Republican. At the end of the day, nobody takes the time to learn what this stuff really means. Meanwhile, I'm looking at the definition of communism and socialism like, yo, this is actually not that bad. And if you take bits and pieces from different systems and approaches, you put them together, you take different ideologies and philosophies, the best of what people had to offer, and find ways to balance it from different leaders, and get you a good mixture, then I think at the end of the day, you can come up with a pretty solid recipe for legitimate progress. And so for me, at this point in time, I will be very transparent. The majority of my activism is cyber activism. I spend a lot of my time really just trying to like contend with how I feel about what it is that I am seeing. And I am vehemently overwhelmed on a daily basis, trying to follow all the different views, opinions, perspectives. I see a lot of things that I think are misguided. I see a lot of things I think are a little bit empty. There's a lot of undereducation out there. There's a lot of miseducation out there. And so it gets really tough to try to figure out where you want to jump in and get this figured out. At the end of the day, though, that's one of the things I appreciate most about having an opportunity to be an educator. Being an educator always creates a space for activism and for forward progress. And so I make my stake and my claim there when afforded the opportunity.
And I would just like to add off of that, just being an educator, today when I woke up to an email from my assistant vice president, and she wrote a long email to all the leadership in the division, just giving her expressions and her feelings on what's going on. And so we started to write back and share with her how we felt about the current state in America. And so I just wanted to piggyback off of what my brother said and just say that, you know, for us, the males that are in education, that work in education, it's okay to take a me day to reflect on the state of what's happening right now in America, and just to reflect on how you can intentionally have these discussions with your students in a positive manner that can spark some sort of revelation or reflection, or ignite an idea within them that they can take and move forward with, something that's not viewed as negative or violence, and that we can kind of move the platform to another level. So I think that we just kind of take a day away from social media with everything that's going on. It's at times we just don't even know what to believe, what videos are true, or the images that they're putting out to us can just distract us from so many things. So I think that it's very important for us to just take a day, a break, and then come back so that we can really do some intentional work around this entire issue of Black Lives Matter.
Wow, wow, wow. Gentlemen, thank you all so much. It is almost 9:30, y'all. Can you believe it? This was an intense discussion, a necessary discussion. Thank you guys for opening your hearts and, you know, and sharing your wisdom and imparting to us, you know, the current state of the Black man and being Black in America, and even going as far as sharing your wisdom as far as history is concerned, and what we need to do and next steps that we can make and take in order to, again, change the narrative within our community. And it starts with us. And so again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate you guys staying with us and rocking with us all the way to the end. Do follow these gentlemen on social media. Please definitely follow them. You're going to see their names, guys, because they're truly, truly giving and really demonstrating the excellence and the beauty of the Black man, you know, and I am so honored to be connected to them. I am so honored to, you know, have Black men who are protectors, because they protect the Black woman. They ain't gonna talk down about the Black woman. They gonna talk up about us. So thank y'all for that. We appreciate you guys. We honor you all. You know, you all probably don't hear it enough, and you should. So we appreciate you guys. We honor the kings that you are. We honor the fathers in you, the father that you are, because I know Tobias is a father, and the fathers that you will be. And so we honor the fathers in you. We honor the providers in you. We honor the protectors in you. And we are so humbled to know you, just to know to have your existence and know your being. And so again, thank you guys so much for sharing on this evening and for being a part of this open discussion. We appreciate everyone tuning in on this evening. This has been another edition of Single Sidebar, and make sure you guys join us the next time. And so may the blessings of the Lord, which make you rich and add no sorrows, be upon you. Join us next time. We love you and we appreciate you guys. Have a great evening. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Single Sidebar Podcast. It is our hope that you took away something from today's episode that you can immediately apply to your life. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram at the Single Sidebar Podcast or at Dr. Sama AM1 if you would like to continue the conversation from today. We do hope that you are able to join us for our next episode.